I'm Javi.
I'm Hank.
This is the Hank
And Javi
Show. Thank you for tuning in. Some of the content we discuss may not be suitable for young viewers.
Yeah, no viewers. This is radio.
Listeners. Some of the content may not be suitable for young listeners. Listener discretion
Is strongly advised.
Enjoy the show. How you doing today, Hank?
I'm good. Hello, hello, hello.
I'm glad you're here. I'm very excited for today. Today, our first book is Viktor E. Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning.
Heavy duty stuff.
Yeah, how'd you feel like when you during the reading process of this book, man?
I loved it. It's really, I had a hard time putting it down. It was really compelling.
Yeah, I got a level with you. I took mushrooms the entire time I read it.
Oh my God.
So it was fantastic. I had a hard time putting it down. And also, like, have you taken mushrooms before?
No, not really. Maybe decades ago.
They're pretty good at letting the emotions, like, flow.
I don't have any problem letting my emotions flow.
It's pretty good at, like you being very empathetic. Apathetic is the word apathetic?
No, empathetic. Apathetic means the lack of emotion. I don't give a shit.
Very good at being empathetic and like really like feeling the character's experience.
Empathic, yeah.
Not the characters, the people's experience. Dude, this book was phenomenal.
Okay, let's not waste it. I think this is good.
Yeah, we'll just keep going.
Yeah, we're not being recorded, are we?
We're recording.
Oh shit.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is us, real and uncut at the Hank and Javi Show.
I thought this was a practice. Okay, well, you can cut it or something in post.
I like it. Let's just keep going.
All right, we'll keep going. All right.
Okay, so there is a passage I would like to start off with.
Okay.
Did you have one in mind?
You go ahead. You had one on, what, 13?
Yes, page 13, which is... Oh, this is a good one. All right. So, from time to time, I guess I'll ask you to read it for me, but I'll read this one.
Okay, I think we should set the location about what this book is about just a bit.
Oh, okay. So, Viktor E. Frankl is a psychologist that lived in Vienna, Austria. He was born in 1905, and he survived the concentration camps, ideally, or more specifically, Auschwitz. He moved from a couple of camps, but he spent most of his time in Auschwitz. Right. So he came up with the theory of logotherapy and existential therapy, which are two large forms of very commonly used forms of therapy today. So this book, Man's Search for Meaning, he tells of his experiences in a first-person perspective and gives a psychological analysis on everything he kind of witnessed.
At the end, right, yeah.
Well, just during...
Well, during it, too.
Yeah, during the stories, he gives... and so he touches on the brutality, but it's not necessarily like a gory, graphic telling of the experiences. It's more in-depth into the inner workings of everybody's mind there, you know, in terms of like how one felt and how one could give up and how one could die.
And how one survives.
Yes.
Incredible brutality.
Yeah. And it's funny that, and there's a passage in here we'll read later about how brutality can come from not only the guards but other prisoners and the Chapo, which are other prisoners who were appointed to point of authority to kind of not maintain, what's the word I'm looking for?
Supervise and
control the other prisoners. And these were Jewish men. And so it's quite a book that kind of forces you to think outside yourself And I think it's a great book. I loved almost every page of it. So the passage I would like to read to start things off is on page 13. It starts off with, I inquired from prisoners who had been there for some time where my colleague and friend, P, had been sent. Was he sent to the left side? Yes, I replied. Then you can see him there, I was told. Where? A hand pointed to the chimney a few hundred yards off, which was standing a column of flame up into the gray sky of Poland. It dissolved into a sinister cloud of smoke. That's where your friend is, floating up to heaven, was the answer. But I still did not understand until the truth was explained to me in plain words.
Yes.
And this is him entering the camp at first.
Right. First thing he sees is the chimneys where they burned.
Yeah, and it was interesting. So that left side and right side, he's talking about when he first got off the train, they line everybody up and they would strip everybody of their belongings. And he had hid his bag underneath his big coat. And a German SS soldier would walk up and he had his right elbow in his left hand, and he had his limp wrist with a finger pointed out, and he would look and judge every prisoner, and of course Victor didn't know what he was judging him off of, and he would point to the right and then to the left in a very gay Disney character villain kind of way, left and to the right. And he remembered somebody had said, look smart, look proper, look strong, and he noticed everybody he picked to the right were people that looked like they weren't ill or fit for work, and people to the left were people that weren't, and people to the left were people that were exterminated.
Yeah,
first on entering the camp.
Yeah, pretty arbitrary decision.
Yeah, in a way that left right elbow and left hand and kind of limp wrist, kind of pointing, and it's just like
it's probably tired.
Yeah, and it's just like such little muscle,
yeah.
as least amount of effort he could possibly use to dictate life and death.
You know, there's an old expression, the fickle finger of fate, and that's a perfect example of it.
Mm-hmm.
With a guard, with his finger, decides whether you're going to live or whether you're going to die.
Oh, man.
So, you had another one.
Yes. So on the very next page, afterwards, after he's been chosen to the right side, which means damnation in working for in the camps, so they're taken from the separating area and they're put into columns and they're sent to these showers. And he says here when he realizes, so I'll just read the passage here. While we were waiting for the showers, our nakedness was brought home to us. We really had nothing now except our bare bodies. For minus hair, we all possessed literally was our naked essence. What else remained for our material link to our former lives? For me, there were my glasses and my belt. The latter I had exchanged later for a piece of bread. It's funny. I was reading this part, and I was in my warm house, and I was wearing sweats, and I was pretty high, and I was wearing a hoodie, and I was kind of indulging in all this comfort, and I never realized, is that little fucking dog right there? I realized that I never experienced nothing before. I never experienced having nothing, and that's what having nothing is when it comes down to being naked in the shower, surrounded by other naked people.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like it when you read that passage, it demands gratitude for your life.
Right.
Yeah.
And you'd sell yourself for a little piece of bread.
Yeah. For what you have, your glasses and your belt.
Yeah.
The latter you trade in for a piece of bread.
And on the next page, there's a quote that I had that once he's there in this camp and he's seeing all of this cruelty going on, the deprivation and how vulnerable we are, how helpless they were. And he says, He said, when my life was once endangered by a climbing accident, I felt only one sensation at the critical moment: curiosity. Curiosity as to whether I could come out of it alive or with a fractured skull or some other injuries. Cold curiosity predominated even in Auschwitz, somehow detaching the mind from its surroundings, which came to regard it with a kind of objectivity. At that time, one cultivated this state of mind as a means of protection. We were anxious to know what would happen next and what would be the consequence, for example, of our standing in the open air, in the chill of late autumn, stark naked and still wet from the showers. In the next few days, our curiosity evolved in surprise. Surprise that we did not catch cold. And I think that later on he talks about how the body reacts to various circumstances, emotional circumstances. And in this kind of situation, the body knows that they're in profound trouble, I think, and so it kicks in its immune system to try to survive, because the body wants to survive at all costs. And this is one of those examples. Aside from the fact that one of the survival things he's talking about here is just remove yourself emotionally, because if you get emotionally demonstrative, the guards are going to pick you out and they're going to deal with you harshly. And so the best defense is no defense. Just take it and keep calm and let your mind just simply observe.
Yeah. It's like when he talks about suffering in the book, it's like you can't take someone's suffering for them. You can't stop someone suffering. You have to let them suffer. You have to and also it's like you have to let yourself suffer. You have to let yourself experience.
Right.
And you can't really speak up. You can't really stop it. You just gotta let it happen, in a way that's like when you're falling, you can't stop from falling. Once you've already started falling, there's nothing you can do but to embrace what's gonna happen next. I don't know. I've never felt. That's why he's talking about that curiosity. That curiosity from when he's rock climbing. It's just like you can't do nothing about it once you've fallen. Once the decision has been made that you will fall, you are falling. Your privates are tingling.
Yes.
You're about to hit the ground. There's nothing you can do but be in a perspective, and kind of, I mean, if you can, in that brief moment. I like that he quoted like Nietzsche and Dostoevsky. How am I saying it right? Dostoevsky, the one's a Polish philosopher, which is Nietzsche, and the other one was Russian. So here is, so
you got Dostoevsky. Is that what you're going to?
Yeah, Dostoevsky. No, I think it's actually Nietzsche. Nietzsche. He says here at the beginning in the foreword part of the book on page Roman numerals. It's the first page off after you get the context.
Okay.
Which is kind of. It's a Nietzsche quote that kind of that grasp the entire point of this book. And of course it's man's search for meaning, but it's in the question that's bared before what we search for meaning. It's Nietzsche's quote. He said, "He who has a why to live for can bear almost anyhow." And it's,
say that again.
Yeah. He who has a why to live for can bear almost anyhow.
Yeah, if you got a meaning, a purpose.
Yeah, and that's this book. That's the whole point. It's enduring all this shit in this concentration camp. But if you have a why, you can bear it in. You can bear anything, almost anything, and that's kind of the beauty of this book. There's a passage in here that I would like to touch bases on, which is on page 66, talking about the meaning of the book.
Okay.
Let me find my spot here. Choice, action, and face such circumstances. I don't think this is actually it. I think it's 77. Here it is. Now I'm gonna read it, and I'm probably gonna slaughter it. So, would you be comfortable with reading it?
Sure. What page?
Here, I got it highlighted here.
This one?
Yes, that
Okay.
passage there. So this is kind of the thesis, not the thesis, but the kind of the point.
Okay. He says, well, we had to learn ourselves, and furthermore, we had to teach the despairing men. There were men who were despairing, wanted suicide, and that sort of thing. It did not really matter what we expected from life, but rather what life expected from us. We needed to stop asking about the meaning of life and instead to think of ourselves as those who were being questioned by life daily and hourly. Our answer must consist not in talk and meditation, but in right action and in right conduct. Life ultimately means taking the responsibility to find the right answer to its problems and to fulfill the tasks which it constantly sets for each individual. These tasks, and therefore the meaning of life, differ from man to man and from moment to moment. Thus, it is impossible to define the meaning of life in a general way. Questions about the meaning of life can never be answered by sweeping statements. Life does not mean something vague, but something very real and concrete, just as life's tasks are also very real and concrete. They form man's destiny, which is different and unique for each individual. No man and no destiny can be compared with any other man or any other destiny. No situation repeats itself, and each situation calls for a different response. Sometimes the situation in which a man finds himself may require him to shape his own fate by action. At other times, it is more advantageous for him to make use of an opportunity for contemplation and to realize assets in this way. Sometimes, man may be required simply to accept fate, to bear his cross. Every situation is distinguished by its uniqueness, and there is always only one right answer to the problem posed by the situation at hand. That's pretty powerful stuff. And then I want to pick up on the page just before that.
Okay.
Okay, up at the top there, the very first paragraph up there. Everything can be taken from a man but one thing. The last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. Every day, every hour offered the opportunity to make a decision which determined whether you would or would not submit to the powers which threaten to rob you of your very self, your inner freedom, which determined whether or not you would become the plaything of circumstance, renouncing freedom and dignity to become molded into the form of the typical inmate. Fundamentally, therefore, any man can, even under such circumstances, decide what shall become of him mentally and spiritually. He may retain his human dignity even in a concentration camp. Dostoevsky said once, "There is only one thing I dread, not to be worthy of my suffering. Oh, God, that got me. Martyrs whose behavior in camp, whose suffering and death bore witness to the fact that the last inner freedom cannot be lost. It can be said that they were worthy of their sufferings. The way they bore their suffering was a genuine inner achievement. That line, we have to be worthy of our suffering.
Wow, dude! He quotes these poets,
I know,
and these philosophers.
Yeah.
That line, and it's funny. I had to stop reading. And I almost had to like read. I did this. I read the page before and the page after to justify well, that line.
Yeah.
That I would. What's the line? What page is that on?
It's on 66.
66.
You're trying to find worthy of their suffering line?
Yeah, there is only one thing that I dread,
Yeah.
not to be worthy of my sufferings.
Yeah.
And it's funny because like I thought about that line. I thought about it, and I thought about it, and I thought about it. And I came to the conclusion because I struggled with it. I was like, what could it mean? It could mean several things. The meaning I like is not to be someone that breaks down every meaning of everything, but I like that it means that if you need to, how do I put this into words? I guess I would say it out loud. That your suffering will be wasted on you. That if you don't really take into contemplation your suffering and really value it for what it's worth, and it's wasted on you. And the wisdom that can be learned from your suffering is not there anymore. It's gone. And
he says that just next there in the middle of the next page, if there is a meaning in life at all, then there must be a meaning in suffering. Suffering is an ineradicable part of life, even as fate and death. Without suffering and death, human life cannot be complete.
yes.
Yeah. He's saying it's the way we take up our cross, can you...
I like that line. When you take up your cross, it's like it's almost like the Hail Mary pass. It's just the last thing that we have that can't be taken from us. The spirituality, our beliefs. Because I think that's what that word represents. You take up your cross. You take up your beliefs. You take umbrage in what you believe in, because that can't be taken from you. I feel like everything else can be stripped. You can be naked in a shower, surrounded by naked people with your haircut, your glasses, and a belt that you're willing to trade for a piece of bread. But you can still take up your cross. That's that last thing, man. That last, I don't know, the nail, the one nail holding up the whole house,
Right. There's choose our attitude in times of stress. Yeah.
I like the passage on 69. I'll read that one.
Okay, good.
This young woman knew that she would die in the next few days. But when I talked to her, she said cheerfully, in spite of this knowledge, I am grateful that fate has hit me so hard, she told me. In my former life, I was spoiled and did not take spiritual accomplishments seriously. Pointing through the window of her hut, she said, this tree here is the only friend I have in my loneliness. Through the window, she could see just a branch of a chestnut tree, and on this branch were 2 blossoms. I often talk to this tree, she said to me. I was startled and didn't quite know how to take her words. Was she delirious? Did she have occasional hallucinations? Anxiously, I asked her if the tree replied, yes. What did it say to her? She answered, it said to me, I am here. I am here. I am life. Eternal life.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess in a place of death like that, finding some kind of life, and the tree could represent that for her, I think.
The blossoms on the tree.
Yeah.
And it's,
And beauty.
And beauty. And there's some points in here talking about like appreciating life, appreciating beauty. He says when he's working in the dark, he's beating the cold frozen dirt with a shovel and a pickaxe.
Right.
For trenches, and then he can see. He says he's seen the most beautiful sunrise.
Right.
He's ever seen in his entire life. He says when the sun peaks beyond the trees, he goes, "There's true beauty there because you're disconnected in a way that in normal life in the camp is terrifying. It sucks being that disconnected, but in the moments of appreciating the beauty of the sunrise, being disconnected is the only way to appreciate it." And he says that like that's part of one of the few things that are beautiful in being in the camps.
Yes, and there's beauty in some of the actions of there were some of the guards that would give him a little piece of bread now and again, sneaking around. And of the prisoners who came to help other prisoners when they were struggling, if they were marching, there's a beauty and compassion.
Yeah, he said that their feet were so swollen with blisters, and I can't remember when your lower half contains water or retains water, the shoes wouldn't fit anymore, and so they wouldn't be able to tie them. But you had to wear them because it was cold. It was very cold in the winter, and there was snow on the ground, and he said that you would limp from your swollen feet being inside these small shoes. And if you were limping in line, if you had any movements, a guard would hit you with the butt of his rifle in your back. And he said that if you were limping, somebody you didn't know would put his arm underneath your arm and kind of hold you up to keep from you being able to project that you're limping, to keep you from getting hit. Yeah.
By the way, his shoelaces he was very worried all the time because they were just little tiny bits of wire, and if those things broke, he was screwed. His suffering, he says in here, is relative. And you think about that. Something we think if we're suffering, if we have a little headache or we have some fatigue or whatever.
Right.
It's all relative. It says it is possible to practice the art of living even in a concentration camp. This is page 44. Even in a concentration camp, although suffering is omnipresent. To draw an analogy, a man's suffering is similar to the behavior of gas. If a certain quantity of gas is pumped into an empty chamber, it will fill the chamber completely and evenly, no matter how big the chamber. Thus, suffering completely fills the human soul and conscious mind, no matter whether the suffering is great or little. Therefore, the size of human suffering is absolutely relative.
Yeah. There's a thought that came to my mind. The relativity, but it's like comparatively speaking, your suffering to my suffering.
Yeah.
What I got from that was the worst thing that's ever happened to you and the worst thing that happened to me are the same thing. Your suffering is greater than my suffering, but it's the same in that it's the worst thing that's ever happened to you and it's the worst thing that has ever happened to me. And until I experience worse and worse things, that's still going to have as much impact. I mean, relatively speaking, in terms of like how we relate to it in our own kind of inner workings.
And again, it's attitude and choice. I've told you this story before, but I want to tell it with our friends here. I had occasion I've got heart problems because I'm overweight and I'm old, and I had a valve in my heart that wasn't working. And so I had to have an open heart surgery to replace a valve in my aorta, my aortic valve, rather, and which was done with a pig valve, by the way. So I have a pig has given me the gift of life. So anyway, I went into the hospital, Cedars-Sinai, high-end hospital in Hollywood. Hollywood, the Hospital of the Stars. A lot of people have been there. Anyway, so I was in the intensive care unit for 13 days. They only expected 6, but my heart wasn't working the way it should. And so they gave it a few days. The lower half wasn't kicking in as it should. So they put in a pacemaker. Okay. And then so what they did was they literally cut my chest open, spread it open, stopped my heart, put me on a blood machine so it was pumping for the rest of the body, but not to the heart. And then went in there and cut off the old valve and sewed in a new one. And it's a pretty complicated thing. And I have a picture of my chest when I came out of the hospital with all the tubes running in and out. I had about 6 different tubes. And I'll show you a picture afterwards. And so I was there, and then so I was in for another week once I got out of intensive care unit. And the thing that's remarkable to me is that I don't remember any pain or suffering at all. The most suffering I had was dealing with their menu. And they had me on this no-salt diet. But I figured out a way to work around it so I could have cottage cheese and fruit, and I could get a turkey sandwich. I couldn't have regular mayonnaise, but I could have light mayonnaise, and that had a little bit of flavor to it. So I could do those things, and I dealt with the reality of where I was. And I went into it with an attitude of, I'm going to enjoy this, I'm going to learn from it, and enjoy it as much as I possibly can. And I met some wonderful people, and I talked with those people, and I shared my life with some of them, and they with me. I had a nurse who came into the room, and we were talking. He told me he was part of a little band. And I said, oh, that's cool. I'd love to hear some of your work sometime. He said, I've got my guitar in the locker. You wanted me to play you a song? And I said, sure. So he came and he sang to me for a while, That's kind of unusual, I think, in a hospital. But I had a great time. I really enjoyed my time. I had a lot of attention. People were great. And but I didn't have any suffering. They obviously they were giving me nice pain meds and stuff, right. But I don't remember any pain or any suffering, and that's a pretty remarkable thing for an open heart surgery experience.
Yeah. Wow. You think someone goes through open heart surgery, you think that it's a life altering, terribly suffering ordeal. Yeah. Really, you're like, well, I got enough attention that I desire. And
I remember anxiety at one point when they came in. The doctor came in to take the tubes out because they had tubes going up into my heart and around the heart, and draining any fluid or excess stuff. And this guy came in, and as soon as he walked in the room, I trusted him. He's one of those people that has. I guess that's not or I didn't see light around or anything like that, but we make decisions about people that we can trust, whether we like or we're not going to like right off the bat. Right. There's a book called Blink that talks about that. But anyway,
Hank pointed at me because he just got the realization that
there's an idea for a book. So he walked in and I trusted him immediately, and he just came over. He said, "Okay, I'm just going to take this now. It's not going to hurt. It'll be fast." And it was. No pain, just whipped those babies out. And there was a wire connected to my heart that was had electronics attached to it. Mm-hmm. And he pulled it out, and it was about 3 feet long.
Whoa.
And which kind of surprised me. But it didn't hurt me at all.
Was there sensations?
No, I didn't feel anything. No, there was nothing. Just out it came. Wow. So I had a great time having my heart chopped open, my chest.
Well, I'm glad you're better for it.
Yeah, so it's all relative.
It's all relative. I guess if it's funny, I remember listening to a podcast, and it was this guy, Steve Ranella, and he talks about a guy who had open heart surgery. and he looks at this guy, and this guy's got a cane, and he's got a bandage on his chest or whatever. And he goes, "This might be interesting to talk to this guy." And he went to go talk to this guy, and he's like, "Hey, he's out there sitting in front of like a Chewy's or something, and this older guy's girlfriend went to go get the car to pull the car around, so he's sitting there waiting. He's talking to him, and he's like, "Hey, so like, I see you've got the open heart surgery." And he goes, "Yeah, well, it broke 2 of my ribs." And he goes, "What?" He goes, "When they gave me CPR, they broke 2 of my ribs, and it hurts." And he's just like thinking like, this guy just came back from death.
Yeah.
And he's complaining that 2 of his ribs were broken, and it's a little uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And his girl's gonna go get the car, and he might get lucky tonight, he might get laid, but he's complaining about the 2 broken fucking ribs. He's just like thinking, like, man, dude, you could be on top of the world right now. You're alive when you could be dead.
Yeah.
2 broken ribs, baby.
Yeah.
It's relative. It's in this book, man. It talks about the mentality, the mindset. That once you've given up that mindset,
That's true.
it's true. And there's a passage in here. I might have to look for it, but so there was a typhus outbreak amongst a lot of the camps, and in fact, Victor's wife had later died from typhus after the liberation. It's Viktor E. Frankl's a doctor. He's a psychologist or
Psychiatrist,
psychoanalysis. This is how he refers to himself. So he went to medical school, and in the camps he had helped a lot of the sick people, the patients, and so he would give them medical aid. And he worked with this one doctor on the camp, and. What was I talking about? Oh, he talks about the people on their deathbed.
Yeah.
He goes, there's this great part in here. I'd love to read it for you guys. It's talks about the March 13th. You remember that part? So this man had a dream, and he said that an angel had spoken to him and said that he said he would give him an answer to any question he'd have. Pages at 75?
75, yeah. Yeah.
He goes, okay, I'll read this to you. This is pretty powerful stuff. I once had a dramatic demonstration of the close link between the loss of faith in the future and this dangerous giving up. My senior block warden, a fairly well-known composer of librettist, confided in me one day. "I would like to tell you something, doctor. I had a strange dream. A voice told me that I could wish for something, and I should only say what I wanted to know, and all my questions would be answered. So what do you think?" I asked. What I would like to know is when the war would be over for me. You know what I mean, doctor? For me, I wanted to know when our camp would be liberated and our suffering would come to an end. "And when did you have this dream?" I asked. In February 1945, he answered. It was then the beginning of March. What did the dream voice answer? Furtively, he whispered to me, March 30th. When F told me about his dream, he was still full of hope and convinced that the voice in his head would be right. But as the promised day drew nearer, the war news which reached our camp made it appear very unlikely that we would be free from our promised date. On March 29th, F suddenly became ill and ran a high temperature. On March 30th, the day his prophecy was told to him, the war and suffering would be over for him, he became delirious and lost consciousness. On March 31st, he was dead. To all outward appearances, he had died from typhus. But really, he died from hope, from giving up hope.
Giving up hope, right? And he got his answer, and he got his wish. I want to know when I'm going to die. You're going to die on the 30th of March.
He wanted to know
and
when it would be over for me.
Yeah.
And that's when it was over.
That's when it's
on
over.
March 31st.
Yes.
On March 30th, where he was delirious and lost consciousness.
Just further down, he says, the ultimate cause of my friend's death was that the expected liberation did not come, and he was severely disappointed. This suddenly lowered his body's resistance against the latent typhus infection. His faith in the future and his will to live had become paralyzed, and his body fell victim to illness. And thus the voice of his dream was right after all. So on the next page, 76, there's a little short quote. It says here,
oh, yeah.
Any attempt to restore a man's inner strength in the camp had first to succeed in showing him some future goal. Nietzsche's words, he who has a why to live for can bear with almost any how, could be the guiding motto for all psychotherapeutic and psychohygienic efforts regarding prisoners. So, it did not matter really what we expected from life, but rather what life expected from us. We needed to stop asking about the meaning of life and instead to think of ourselves as those who were being questioned by life. Did I read that already?
Yeah, it's a passage in 77 I want to read. But there's a note above that that really kind of hit me. The death rate in the week between Christmas 1944 and New Year's 1945 increased in camp beyond all previous experience. In his opinion, which is the doctor of the camp, the explanation for this increase did not lie in the harder working conditions or the deterioration of our food supplies or the change of weather or the new epidemics. It was simply that the majority of the prisoners had lived in the naive hope that they would be home again by Christmas. At the new time drew nearer and nearer, there was no encouraging news, and the prisoners lost courage, and disappointment overcame them. This had a dangerous influence on their powers of resistance against, and the great number of them died.
There was a little thing on page 84 that talks about it. Says there's a question, what can you tell us about the psychological makeup of the camp guards? How is it possible that men of flesh and blood could treat others as so many prisoners say they have been treated? Having once heard these accounts of having come to believe that these things did happen, one is bound to ask how, psychologically, they could happen. He says, to answer this question, a few things must be pointed out. First, among the guards, there were some sadists of the purest clinical sense. Second, sadists. These sadists were always selected when a really severe detachment of guards was needed, and so they searched for these people who could do these things.
Yeah,
took joy. These guards took joy in making these men suffering.
Well, I didn't know this till I read this book, but it seems as though all the guards in these camps were SS soldiers.
Yeah,
which were SS soldiers were like the most hardened and the most evil of the Nazi war camps or whatever. Mm-hmm. But there's the passage here on the next book. So he breaks down. So he really touches on the Nazis very minimally.
Yes.
It does not. This book isn't full of anti-Nazism.
Nope.
Well, what's that sounded wrong? This book isn't full of hatred towards Nazis. Its book is focusing more on the inner workings of the camp, a member of the concentration camp, a prisoner. Mm-hmm. And so there are a couple things in here he does touch it, and it's pretty late in the section of the book that talks about man's search for meaning, the experiences in the camps. He does tell this. He breaks it on in a couple parts. There was guards who were sadists. Secondly, the sadists were always selected. And thirdly, the feeling of the majority of the guards had been dulled by a number of years in which, in ever-increasing doses, they had witnessed the brutal methods of the camp. These moral and mentally hardened men at least refused to take active part in the sadistic measures, but they did not prevent others from carrying them out. And fourth, this is the last kind of experience he shares, or the type of guard. He goes, fourth, it must be stated that even among the guards there were some who took pity on us. I shall only mention the commander of the camp from which I was liberated. It was found after the liberation, only the camp doctor, a prisoner himself, had known of it previously. That this man had paid no small sum of money from his own pocket in order to purchase medicines for his prisoners from the nearest market town. But the senior camp warden, a prisoner himself, was harder. Oh, let me go back.
That's right.
But the senior camp warden, a prisoner himself, was harder than any of the SS guards. He beat the other prisoners at every slightest opportunity, while the camp commander, to my knowledge, never once lifted his hand against any of us. And it's important that he's noting that the guards were fucked up, but also a lot of the prisoners were pretty brutal, pretty heartening. Could you read? So on page 86, on the beginning of the first full paragraph,
It's apparent.
it is apparent, and then at the end of the last, just that one paragraph.
Okay.
Because I like it so much, I don't want to read it because I'll fuck it up. But I got emotional when I read this. I read this like 6 times last night, and goddamn, yeah. So.
Well, it is apparent that the mere knowledge that a man was either a camp guard or a prisoner tells us almost nothing. Human kindness can be found in all groups, even those which as a whole it would be easy to condemn. The boundaries between groups overlapped, and we must not try to simplify matters by saying that these men were angels and those were devils. Certainly, it was a considerable achievement for a guard or a foreman to be kind to the prisoners in spite of all the camp's influences. And on the other hand, the baseness of a prisoner who treated his own companions badly was exceptionally contemptible. Obviously, the prisoners found the lack of character in such men especially upsetting. And while they were profoundly moved by the smallest kindness received from any of the guards. I remember how one day a foreman secretly gave me a piece of bread, which I knew he must have saved from his breakfast ration. It was far more than the small piece of bread which moved me to tears at that time. It was the human something which this man also gave to me, the word and look which accompanied the gift.
Now picture me in my underwear, high on mushrooms, fat, sitting on the couch with a silk blanket over my lap, crying
Yes.
to this passage.
Yeah.
And then realizing that I'm crying
Yeah.
to this passage.
Yes.
And then hardening myself.
Yes.
And then crying again because of the fucking passage. Oh, man. I read that like 7 times or whatever I said I had read it.
Yeah.
It's like right now, with everything going on, we're so quick to separate ourselves from people that don't agree with us politically or whatever.
Yeah.
And this passage shows that nothing is black and white.
Yeah.
The greatest evils, and in this next passage, he talks about there's two races. There's decent race and an indecent race.
Yeah.
And he goes, there's no race that is full. There's no people that are full with one indecent or full with decent. There's so much of it ingrained in everything, and everywhere you look, you'll find indecent people, regardless of what group they're part of, what their religious beliefs are, what family member, friend, stranger, homeless, police. There's indecent in everything, and then there's decent race in everything.
That's I think true. He's this man is. I would love to have known this man. We get a chance. He did things in the camp. He's a medical doctor and a psychiatrist as well. On top of that, he went to the different schools, and so they used him in the camp as a doctor. And there are times when they asked him to go to this other camp that was just loaded with typhus, and he knew that he could come down with typhus, and he was exhausted and starved, but he went anyway. And that is the mark of his decency, and he certainly earned his suffering.
There's also
he was worthy of his suffering, rather.
Yeah, there's also this point in the book when another prisoner had come to him, and they had planned an escape.
Yes.
And at this point, he was taking care of the typhus patients.
Yes.
And they had decided, he had decided at the last moment to stay behind.
Yes.
And read and take care of one of his patients.
Yes.
Who was moments from death. Because he knew the value of being there with him opposed the freedom that he could experience. He knew that what he would give up to escape, he found it more valuable to stay there and do what he had promised that man he would do.
Right. I want to there's a couple of more things I'd like to bring up here. Where is it here? Just a second. I've had it here a moment ago.
You're good. Me adjust your mic.
He after he got out of the prison camp at the end of the war, he was talking about going to another place where they were having a group session of psychotherapy, and he's.
Is this in the second half of the book?
Yeah, this is in 116, page 116, 117. And he's talking about giving meaning and getting perspective and thinking about who believe that there is no meaning into their life. Their life had no meaning. And this is a little lengthy, but it's an interesting story, and I'd like to read it. It's on 16. He said, I'd like to cite the following instance. What is the meaning of my life? Once the mother of a boy who had died at the age of 11 years was admitted to a hospital department after a suicide attempt. Dr. Kurt Kirkerek invited her to join a therapeutic group, and it happened that I stepped into the room where he was conducting a psychodrama. He was telling her a story. At the death of her boy, she was left alone with another, older son who was crippled, suffering from the effects of infantile paralysis. The poor boy had to be moved around in a wheelchair. His mother, however, rebelled against her fate. But when she tried to commit suicide together with him, it was the crippled son who prevented her from doing so. He liked living. For him, life had remained meaningful. Why was it not so for his mother? How could her life still have a meaning? And how could we help her to become aware of it? Improvising, I participated in the discussion and questioned another woman in the group, and I asked her how old she was, and she answered 30. And I replied, no, you're not 30, but instead 80. You're lying on your deathbed, and now you're looking back on your life, a life which was childless, but full of financial success and social prestige. And then I invited her to also imagine what she would feel like in this situation. What will you think of? What will you say to yourself lying on your bed, you're 80 and dying? Let me quote what she actually said from a tape which was recorded during the session. Oh, I married a millionaire. I had an easy life full of wealth, and I lived it up. I flirted with men. I teased them, but now I'm 80. I have no children of my own. And looking back as an old woman, I cannot see what all that was for. Actually, I must say that my life was a failure. I then invited the mother of the handicapped son to imagine herself similarly looking back over her life. Let us listen to what she had to say as recorded on the tape. I wish to have children, and this wish has been granted to me. One boy died. The other, however, the crippled one, would have been sent to an institution if I had not taken over his care. And though he is crippled and helpless, he is, after all, my boy. And so I have made a fuller life possible for him. I have made a better human being out of my son. At this moment, there was an outburst of tears and crying. She continued, as for myself, I can look back peacefully on my life, for I can say that my life was full of meaning, and I have tried hard to fulfill it. I have done my best. I have done the best for my son. My life was no failure. And viewing her life as if from her deathbed, she had suddenly been able to see a meaning in it, a meaning which even included all of her sufferings. That was a very compelling time for me, because I'm 83 and a half, and I've often wondered, well, what is my life about? Mm-hmm. And so for just a minute, I said, okay, if I look back over my life, did I have was there any meaning to my life? All I did was play a lot. I got to play. I got to go to, I got a job at Bakersfield College for 25 years, and I got to teach, and I got to play in plays and act and direct and show films. And I had a lot of fun. Well, what was the meaning in that? But I think after talking to some of my students, some of them wrote me some really nice rainy day notes, I call them. When things, you're feeling down a little bit, you read one of those things and it makes you feel better. And I've had students tell me that I made a difference and I helped them, because I've tried suicide a number of times, and I would tell my students about that. Most professors were not that personal, but I was. And I think that I have helped people, and part of my meaning now is I carry food and water and things in the trunk of my car, and I stop for homeless people who are sitting around or walking and give them those things. And that's my little way of helping for that moment. And I don't judge them. They're precious human beings, and they're in a bad situation. They're like the prisoners in Dachau in some way. Some of them look like people from Dachau, or Auschwitz. And they're starving, some of them. And they desperately need love. So that's my little way of loving, is helping with that.
Would you consider it a failure?
No, I don't consider myself a failure. There have been times when I did, but now looking back, I've done some shit, that I'm not proud of.
As we all.
Yes, but overall, I'm looking back and I'm feeling like I have helped. I've made people laugh. Laughter is a healing thing, and maybe that's kind of a puny reason to think of yourself as being worthwhile, but I care about people, I guess. I love people, and I do what I can when I can, as I can.
Beautiful. I'm glad we chose this book.
I am too.
I definitely felt like what's that?
Dog.
I feel like it's definitely helped me look at my life in a way that I didn't look at it before, and I think that's what a book's supposed to do. A great book like this, it's supposed to change the way you look at yourself. And I looked at myself through this book before. I'd been kind of in a hard time. I don't know what it was. After having a great show and getting things done, having a great month, there's like this essence that hit me, and it's like this sorrow all the time, depression, and you call it what it is. But reading this book, it's lifted me out of it. Last night I cooked dinner.
Good.
And I cleaned the house, and I was getting things ready, and I read, 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 and I read. And of course I was a little high on mushrooms, but there was a great gratitude there. And this book, and knowing that I was going to get to do this with you, going over it today, it's definitely a high. Yeah, and I'm glad we got to do this. I'm glad we're doing it. So, what did you find in the second half of the book? So I really connected with the first part, which was his telling of the experience. So there's the first half of the book is called I have it here, entrance in the experiences in the concentration camp. And then the second half, which is kind of more, I would say it's a little more textbooky in terms of what it's going over. And the second part is called logotherapy in a nutshell. With logo, there's the philosophy logos, ethos, and pathos, which is logos is meaning.
Yes.
And so he talks about that. It's definitely a great book. I'd highly recommend it. Would you highly recommend it, Hank?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Unquestionably.
Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor E. Frankl. How do you feel, Hank? Did we do justice to this book, reviewing it and talking about it?
Probably not.
Nowhere near.
Yeah.
Nowhere near. I recommend taking mushrooms, reading the book.
No! Sitting on the couch naked crying.
Sitting on the couch naked. Oh, I had underwear on, but I had one sock on. Yeah. Viktor E. Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning.
Yeah.
Thank you, Hank, for doing this with me.
Oh, it's been a joy and a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. We have the second book selected for the second episode. Hank, would you like to announce that?
Sure. We're going to do Will Smith's book called Will.
The book that came out earlier this year, I actually got it as a gift for Christmas. I showed it to Hank because Hank was having a hard time picking a book. So we will be reading Will by Will Smith with Mark Manson. So I'm very excited. It's a very interesting looking book. Yeah. It's got a lot of pictures in it.
I like pictures.
It's got pictures in it, so that's pretty cool. As two actors reading a book about an actor that speaks about acting, hopefully we might find something interesting. Yeah. And Hank decided to pick this book because it's a little lighter than...
Well, this is for Viktor Frankl's. This is a heavy book.
This was a heavy book. For 160 pages, it really felt like a ton. When you pick it up, it's almost like you're picking up the weight. It really doesn't feel like you're itself. It feels like you're picking up the spirit in it, So yeah, we will be reading Will by Will Ferrell and Mark Mason. We will set a date. We don't know when we're going to do it. Would you like to set a date now?
No.
So Hank picked the second book, and I'll be picking the third. This has been the Hank and Javi Show. I'm Javi.
I'm Hank.
And we're glad you're here.
Well, thanks.
We'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Thank you and have a good day.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Thanks for listening. That was a pretty good episode. We're glad you're able to join us. Now, if you feel like you want to subscribe, please feel free to do so. And if you feel like you got a suggestion for a future episode, please leave that in the comments section below. We'll read every comment.
That's a promise.
That's a promise. And that's a Hank Webb promise. You know, those are promises you can take to the bank. And so we'll read every comment. And if we like your suggestion, you might see it on a future episode. So please, and thank you for listening.